Trevor dangled the silver padlock key inches from my face, a slow, easy smile spreading across his mouth. Outside, the Savannah sun was baking the earth, pushing the temperature past 100 degrees, and my senior rescue dog, Amos, was locked inside the unventilated metal storage shed in the backyard. "Sign the guarantee," Trevor said, tapping the heavy corporate document on my desk. $100,000 for the wedding vendors. The ink dries. You get the key. Simple. My mother, Stacy, stood in the hallway doorway. Her arms were crossed. Her expression was completely blank. She was actively blocking my only exit, protecting her favorite child's extortion plot. My chest tightened until my ribs ached. I grabbed the pen. I pressed the tip into the paper so hard it tore through the final page. I slashed my signature across the line, ripped the key from Trevor's fingers, and shoved past my mother. The heat inside that metal box hit like a physical wall. Amos was collapsed in the dirt, his breathing shallow, his tongue a terrifying shade of pale blue. I scooped his heavy, limp body into my arms and carried him out to my truck. My family thought they had just secured the funding for the perfect wedding. They had no idea they had just handed me the shovel to dig their graves. I broke every speed limit between the estate and the veterinary clinic. The tires screamed against the asphalt, taking the sharp corners. In the passenger seat, Amos lay completely motionless. His chest barely rose. I kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other pressed against his ribs, feeling the terrifying, erratic flutter of his failing heart. I prayed to a God I had not spoken to in years. I burst through the glass clinic doors. Marcus was already waiting at the front desk. He took one look at Amos's pale blue gums, shouted for a technician, and rushed him straight into the back trauma room. The heavy swinging doors clicked shut. They cut me off from the only living creature on this earth who actually mattered to me. I sank into a stiff plastic chair in the empty waiting room. I looked down at my hands. They were coated in white primer, wood stain, and dirt. I am Magnolia. I renovate and restore old houses for a living. I spend my days in steel-toed boots, and I have calluses thicker than shoe leather. My family despises that about me. They prefer country clubs, luxury cars, and the kind of custom-tailored suits Trevor was wearing right now back at the estate. The irony tasted like copper in my mouth. That massive, beautiful southern plantation home where my brother was currently hosting his six-figure wedding reception, I own it. I bought it entirely in cash from the bank 3 years ago when my father, Dennis, ran his finances straight into the ground. I held the deed in a secure legal trust. I paid the exorbitant property taxes. I kept a roof over my parents' heads to save them from total public humiliation. But you would never know I was the landlord by looking at the last 6 weeks. Trevor decided my grandfather's old house was the perfect venue to impress his new wealthy in-laws. He took over the property, and I let him do it. I spent a month and a half entirely on my hands and knees. I sanded down the original hardwood floors until my joints ached. I painted the grand ballroom ceiling. I rewired the intricate garden lighting under the brutal Georgia sun. Every time Trevor walked past me, he made sure his groomsmen laughed at the dirt smudged across my face. He introduced me as the family's charity case, the pathetic hired help they kept around out of sheer pity. People always ask why someone stays in a toxic situation. When you grow up in a house where love is entirely conditional, you learn to shrink yourself. You learn to swallow your pride just to keep a fragile, fake peace. I told myself it was fine. I told myself that if I just fixed the house, if I just stayed out of sight in the maintenance quarters, they would eventually leave me alone. I just wanted a quiet, stable place for Amos to recover from his recent heart surgery. I normalized their constant emotional abuse because fighting back always felt too exhausting. I traded my dignity for the illusion of family, They broke me down into a ghost haunting my own home. They treated me like a servant, and I accepted it. But sitting in that sterile clinic, staring at the scuff marks on my boots, the heavy fog in my brain finally cleared. Trevor did not just hurl another insult at me today. He took a sick, defenseless animal and threw him into a baking metal oven just to extort $100,000 out of my business accounts. My mother stood guard at the door. My father actively encouraged it. The desperate, submissive daughter who just wanted her parents to love her died in that waiting room. I stood up. The shaking in my hands stopped entirely. My blood ran completely cold. They thought my silence meant I was weak. They forgot I build massive structural foundations from the ground up, and I know exactly where to swing the hammer to bring the whole house crashing down. Marcus pushed through the swinging doors. The heavy hinges squeaked in the quiet clinic. He stripped off his blue surgical gloves and gave me a single, sharp nod. Amos was stable. His heart was holding steady. I let out a long, ragged breath. Then Marcus handed me a thin paper printout. It was the data log from the smart medical collar Amos wore around his neck. I dragged my finger across the graph. A jagged red line spiked violently right around the time Trevor locked that silver padlock. It was a terrifying, undeniable record of a living creature baking alive in a metal box. 2 more degrees, Marcus said, and his organs would have shut down completely. I did not crumple the paper. I folded it with absolute precision, matching the corners perfectly, and slid it into my pocket. That piece of paper was a weapon. I pulled my heavy work laptop from my canvas bag and balanced it on my knees right there in the sterile waiting room. One click into my corporate banking portal confirmed the damage. The $100,000 guarantee had already cleared. Trevor moved incredibly fast when other people's money was on the line. I moved faster. I bypassed the main ledger and opened the wire routing details. The money did not go to the high-end Savannah florist. It did not go to the luxury catering company currently setting up the massive champagne tower in my backyard. The funds vanished straight into a holding account for Savannah Heritage Consulting. It was a shell company, registered to a local P.O. box, registered exclusively under my brother's name. He didn't just extort me to save his precious wedding. He used my dying dog as leverage to rob me blind. Another quick search through the county property records told the entire pathetic story. He used my company's capital to clear his massive personal credit debts and wire a non-refundable down payment on a luxury beach condo. He fully intended to leave me holding the bag for every single unpaid wedding vendor at that reception tonight. He was going to let my business tank to buy himself a vacation home. I picked up my phone and dialed my commercial banker's direct emergency line. I gave her my security PIN. I declared the transfer a product of criminal extortion and corporate fraud. The account was frozen entirely. The funds were locked down before Trevor could move another dime. My phone buzzed against my palm. A text from Trevor. It was a selfie. He was standing at the base of the estate's grand staircase, adjusting the silk lapels of his custom tuxedo. His smile was wide, arrogant, and entirely punchable. He looked like a man who had just conquered the world. The caption underneath read, "See, everything works out when you finally act like family." I stared at his polished leather shoes standing on the exact hardwood floor I spent 3 weeks sanding on my hands and knees. I locked my screen. I walked straight into the clinic restroom and locked the door behind me. I stripped off my paint-stained work shirt and tossed it directly into the trash can. I turned the sink faucet all the way to hot. I grabbed a rough paper towel and scrubbed the primer, the dirt, and the submission off my hands until my skin was raw and pink. I walked out to my truck and grabbed the garment bag I kept in the back seat for high-level client meetings. I pulled on a sharp, perfectly tailored navy suit. I buttoned the jacket. I looked at my reflection in the glass window. The quiet, accommodating sister was dead. The estate owner was ready for a wedding. Trevor dangled the silver padlock key just inches from my face. A slow, easy smile spread across his mouth. Outside, the Savannah sun baked the earth, pushing the temperature past 100 degrees. And my senior rescue dog, Amos, was locked inside the unventilated metal storage shed in the backyard. "Sign the guarantee," Trevor said. He tapped the heavy corporate document on my desk. $100,000 for the wedding vendors. The ink dries. You get the key. Simple. My mother, Stacy, stood in the doorway. Her arms were crossed tight against her chest. Her expression was completely blank. She was actively blocking my only exit, protecting her favorite child's extortion plot. My chest tightened until my ribs ached. I grabbed the pen. I pressed the tip into the paper so hard it tore through the final page. I slashed my signature across the line, ripped the key from Trevor's fingers, and shoved past my mother. The heat inside that metal box hit like a physical wall. Amos was collapsed in the dirt. His breathing was shallow, his tongue a terrifying shade of pale blue. I scooped his heavy, limp body into my arms and carried him straight to my truck. My family thought they had just secured the funding for the perfect wedding. They had no idea they had just handed me the shovel to dig their graves. Trevor's smug smile collapsed. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. He gripped the edge of the head table. His knuckles turned completely white. He threw a frantic look at his new bride, then pointed a trembling finger at me. "She's lying," he screamed into the dead air. "She signed the guarantee. She still owes the vendors $100,000. The head catering manager stepped out from the kitchen corridor. He crossed his arms over his crisp white uniform. "We haven't seen a single dime. Trevor." I tapped the spacebar on my laptop. The projector screen shifted from the property deed to the bank wire routing trace. The bold black letters stretched across the wall for every wealthy guest to read. The funds bypassed the vendors entirely. They landed straight into Savannah Heritage Consulting, followed immediately by a $50,000 down payment on a luxury beach condo in his name. The silence in the ballroom shattered. The whispers escalated into a deafening roar of outrage. The catering manager signaled his staff. The grand crystal chandeliers abruptly went dark, replaced by harsh, glaring work lights. Waiters began pulling plates of expensive food right out from under the guests. Rental crews started stacking the gold chiavery chairs, scraping the metal legs across the floor. Trevor stumbled backward. He bumped into the towering champagne glass pyramid, sending it crashing to the floor. Shards of crystal exploded across the hardwood. He was losing everything. His eyes darted around the room, wild and desperate. "She set me up," Trevor hollered, his voice cracking with sheer hysteria. "She faked the whole thing. She lied about the dog just to steal my wedding." The heavy oak doors at the back of the estate swung wide open. The thick brass hinges groaned. Marcus walked down the center aisle. He held a thick leather leash. Amos trotted right beside him, his tail wagging a slow, steady rhythm. He wore a thick black smart medical collar around his neck. The crowd parted instantly, pulling their expensive gowns away to give the veterinarian and the rescue dog a wide berth. Marcus stopped at the AV booth. He plugged a single auxiliary cable into the side of the collar's receiver module. The massive ballroom speakers crackled to life. Trevor's own voice echoed off the high-vaulted ceilings, cold and unmistakable. "Just leave him in there. If the dog is actually important, she will find the money." My father's deep baritone chimed in immediately after. "Just don't let the animal die before we get her signature." A collective gasp ripped through the room. Women covered their mouths in absolute horror. Trevor's new mother-in-law grabbed her daughter's arm and physically dragged the weeping bride away from the head table. They bolted for the exit, stepping right over the broken glass. Trevor opened his mouth to speak. No words came out. He looked at the sea of disgusted faces, finally realizing his captive audience was completely gone. Two local police officers stepped out of the shadows near the coat check, flanked by a uniformed animal control agent. They marched straight onto the stage. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked loudly around Trevor's wrists. They grabbed my father next, securing his hands tight behind his back. They dragged them out the front doors. The flashing red and blue siren lights painted the walls of my estate. I sank to my knees right there on the original hardwood floor. Amos pushed his wet nose into my neck. I buried my face in his soft fur. The chaotic, lavish wedding was completely gone. The house was finally quiet. The morning after the wedding, the Savannah estate was completely silent. There were no caterers shouting, no delivery trucks backing into the driveway, no family members barking orders at me from the porch. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the central air conditioning and the soft clicking of Amos's nails as he walked across the hardwood floor. The silence was just the beginning. The real reckoning played out in a sterile federal courtroom 14 weeks later. Trevor stood before a judge, wearing a cheap, wrinkled suit that hung loosely off his frame. The arrogance was completely gone. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 felony count of extortion. The judge did not care about his carefully cultivated image. She sentenced him to 48 months in a federal correctional institution, with eligibility for parole only after 36 months. The court also ordered full restitution of the $100,000, plus heavy punitive fines. Dennis did not fare much better. The forged supplemental will he proudly waved in my face earned him a felony conviction for real estate fraud. Given his age and lack of prior criminal history, he avoided a prison cell, but he received 5 years of heavily monitored probation and a crippling financial penalty that drained his remaining retirement accounts. My mother, Stacy, avoided handcuffs, but she lost the only thing she actually valued: her social standing. The bride's wealthy family launched a massive, ruthless civil lawsuit against her and Dennis for the ruined wedding expenses and the emotional distress caused to their daughter. The local country club formally revoked my parents' membership. At the grocery store, their old friends suddenly found fascinating things to look at in the ceiling whenever Stacy walked down the aisle. The gossip ripped through their high society circles like a wildfire. She became a ghost in her own hometown, trapped in a rented apartment, stripped of the prestige she had sacrificed my sanity to protect. 7 months passed. The winter chill finally swept through Georgia. I was standing on the front porch, wrapping the exposed water pipes with insulation tape, when my phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. It was a voicemail from an unknown number. I pressed play. My mother's voice leaked through the small speaker. She sounded thin, frail, and completely stripped of her old commanding authority. She spent 3 minutes crying about how hard the holidays were going to be this year. She talked about how Trevor was struggling in the federal facility. She talked about how quiet her apartment was. "We are still your family, Magnolia." Her voice cracked over the line. "You have to forgive us eventually. It's what God wants. Please call me back." I stood on the porch and listened to the recording finish. I waited for the familiar spike of anger. I waited for the heavy, suffocating guilt that used to grip my throat every time she sounded disappointed in me. Nothing happened. I just felt incredibly tired of the performance. I pressed the delete button. The screen flashed, confirming the message was permanently erased. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, picked up my roll of tape, and finished wrapping the pipes. The cold wind blew across the lawn, but my chest stayed perfectly warm. I walked back inside the estate. The grand foyer, once a monument to my family's toxic vanity, finally felt like a home. The heavy, oppressive velvet curtains were gone, replaced by sheer linen that let the morning sun pour across the floors I had sanded with my own 2 hands. Marcus sat at the massive kitchen island, sipping black coffee and reviewing a set of architectural blueprints for my next renovation project. Amos lay sprawled on a thick orthopedic rug right next to the heating vent. His heart surgery was a complete success. His tail thumped a lazy, happy rhythm against the floorboards when I walked into the room. Marcus looked up, smiled, and slid a warm ceramic mug across the granite counter toward me. No one was demanding my labor. No one was commenting on the primer stains under my fingernails. We were just two people drinking coffee in the quiet. I had built a sanctuary, and for the first time in my life, I actually got to live in it. When you grow up in a toxic environment, you are conditioned to believe that you are the problem. You are taught that your boundaries are selfish, and your anger is an inconvenience. But toxic people do not see you as a human being. They see you as an appliance. A refrigerator keeps their food cold. A sister pays their bills and paints their walls. When the appliance stops working, they don't ask if it is hurting. They just kick the door and demand it turns back on. It took me 34 years to unplug myself from their machine. If you are watching this, and you are exhausted from carrying the weight of people who only love what you can do for them, I need you to understand 3 things. Rule number 1. Blood is a biological fact, not a moral free pass. Sharing DNA with someone does not obligate you to finance your own abuse. Loyalty is earned through mutual respect, not demanded through a birth certificate. You are allowed to walk away from people who hurt you, even if you share a last name. Rule number 2. Beware the trap of the bigger person. Society loves to tell victims to keep the peace. They tell you to swallow your pride and let things go for the sake of the family. But staying silent in the face of exploitation isn't peace. It is surrender. Keeping the peace with abusers is just a down payment on your own destruction. Boundaries without consequences are just suggestions. Rule number 3. Karma is best served with paperwork. Shouting matches fade, tears dry up. Screaming at a narcissist only gives them the dramatic reaction they crave. But bank wires, notary stamps, and medical data do not lie. True power is quiet, calculated, and documented. Have you ever kept yourself small just to keep a toxic family member comfortable? When did you finally realize that the price of their conditional love was just too high to pay? Share your story in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe in protecting your peace. I am Magnolia Carter, and I am free.